David.
David Emerson, Association of Charitable Foundations in the UK, and not, I hope, an opponent. You spoke so powerfully of motivating visions. In the present times of the austerity in Europe, it seems to me vital that we promote the vision and the role of philanthropy. And I'd welcome thoughts. I see risks in that, however, and I'd welcome your thoughts, observations on how you think best we might tackle that.
Jeff, would you like to take that?
Yeah, I think, I'm sorry, David? David. I think David's point is extremely important right now. I've been this week in Brussels and Frankfurt, and one of the key things I was trying to make to European Union leaders in Brussels is that this is not a time when Europe should step back from the leadership it has shown to the world to invest in development. Now, I know you're asking about philanthropy, but I view that as very much related in terms of having that combination of compassion for people in need, but also, so in addition to the heart, the mind of what's the best way to do it. And the key points that I was trying to make to those leaders, I think, also are relevant to philanthropy. The point being that this is not the time to look too inward and be short-term. It's a time to think about that future and where Europe can and wants to be in that future. And that means continuing that commitment to development and being able to get to that aspirational goal of 0.7. I think it means for all of us to not lose sight of our vision and not get too distracted by the short-term challenges that we face. It's a time where we have to remember that vision and perhaps double down, as they say, on trying to make sure that we are investing for that long term. So that would be how I would approach it.
Avila, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, a couple of things. I think, first of all, it's important that philanthropy creates space for analysis. I mean, increasingly, I've been getting more and more concerned about particularly the media reports that take the TINA model. There is no alternative. And I think that there are alternatives, and we must create space for this discussion about that. The second thing, I think, is that we also need to have a careful eye, and I know there are movements going on through the European Foundation Centre, in terms of who is hurting in this situation, and what can be done about that, but linked to that, to make sure that this situation doesn't throw up a politics of blame and stereotyping. And I think actually one of the things that I actually value about the European project, for all the criticisms and problems, is the fact that I trained as a historian. And looking back, I would say, looking at the situation, if it hadn't been for the work that's going on to create the European Union, you could be looking at another war situation as countries started to turn on themselves. But actually, the European project, I think, has actually, kept a framework for us to at least look at how we can collaborate and cooperate. So I think a number of things, but equally, I do think that it is important, as I say, that people, particularly in poorer areas, don't turn on each other, blame the immigrant, blame the minority, whatever else, and foundations have a role in keeping an eye on that.
Thank you. We'll take a question over here now.
Yes, thank you. First, thank you both for your important and thoughtful presentation.
Is there a microphone beside you there?
My name is Rita, and I represent TEWA, the Nepal Women's Fund, on the Foundations for Peace Network. And Jeff, you said very importantly that it's important to accelerate the process of philanthropy through the use of technology. But I'm wondering, between the global north and the south, where technology is difficult, I mean, the race is lost even before it begins. And how can we bridge that and quicken that space for the global south as well? And in terms of partnership, I think, again, in the context of the global north and south, where by the color of your skin, you are already disadvantaged, how can we create more respect and equity and a sense of justice in that. And some of this can be answered by both. But the other thing I wonder about is why philanthropy has perpetually bypassed the most necessary work in terms of justice and peace. Because there's never any, not enough, but any resources for the kind of works that we do on the ground. Thank you.
Jeff?
I'm going to do my best, Rita, to remember all the different questions you had there, so I apologize if I don't remember all of them. The first thing I want to emphasize is that to accelerate progress in philanthropy, it's not just about technology. It was really about all three T's. It was technology, transparency, and teamwork. I think that's very important. But as a second point that I'll make on your question about technology, I do think whether it's the North or the South, trying to open up the access to technology is very important. Now, technology can be narrowly viewed as information technology, but I think there would be a mistake there. There's a wide range of technologies. In fact, a big part of what Bill and Melinda first attracted them into global health was the idea that vaccines, an important health technology, were available to our kids, the rich kids, but not to poor kids. And so a big part of our commitment at the Gates Foundation has been taking these health interventions that have been narrowly available to the rich world and trying to make them broadly available. So I think that's a second point that I would make, is to think of technology broadly. The third point I would make is that relative to information technology, in fact, the Gates Foundation, because of our heritage, has invested in trying to open up public access computing and internet through libraries. That actually was the very beginning of the foundation. First in the United States, the idea that in order to be able to avoid a digital divide, that we needed to be able to use the tradition of libraries, which opened up the connection to information and knowledge very broadly, to do that with computing, and now we do that in other parts of the world. Eastern Europe, Botswana, states in India, we think that. So that's a third point that I would make. Maybe I'll stop there and see if Avila wants to...
Avila, you might particularly like to address the issue of the lack of resources for peace building and social justice initiatives in the less developed world.
Just on the libraries point, it's actually very interesting because libraries have been under attack in terms of public spending across the UK and here. But actually what we have noticed here is actually libraries have been revitalised by immigrant communities who actually use it as a hub to actually maintain connection with their home countries and use the computers there. And I know Rita's frustration. Haven't tried to organise a Skype call to Nepal where she said, but the electricity's off 16 hours a day. So there is, I think, some practical problems there. On the issue of peace and justice, I actually think that a lot of philanthropy is about justice, and actually is very committed, obviously not all, but a lot of philanthropy is very committed to trying to support justice and working for a progressive social change. Investment in peace building, I think, is more hesitant. And in some ways, I can understand that. Because I think a lot of people are worried that they're going to do more harm. Because it is difficult, and it's always a dynamic situation. It takes a lot of analysis and an impact analysis in terms of who are your partners, who are your allies. If you invest in certain things in a society that's divided or in conflict, are you taking one side over another? So I can understand why there is a reluctance there. As against that, and I did make the point about the importance that we found of outside philanthropists investing in during our conflict. I think what particularly people coming in from the outside can do is ask searching questions, which if you're in a conflict situation like Nepal or ourselves or so many others, it's difficult to do it when you're caught in the middle of it. And actually, people from the outside can sometimes get the fool's pardon for asking those sort of questions, but that need to be asked. But I also think that linking with groups like yourself allow them to keep a finger on the pulse. And the other point I think that is important in terms of conflict situations is the importance of small grants. Because so often, you go to Ramallah or different places, you see the distorting impact of massive, short-term investment that is plunked in and says, well, now that'll solve your problems in 3 years' time. And actually, it sort of can make it worse because it distorts, if you like, the market. There's an absorption problem in terms of NGOs. It takes local activists and puts them in jobs, organised by external agencies. So there's big issues there, and indeed, we've seen it here to an extent ourselves. So I do think that small, flexible grants given, at the right time and pushing the situation forward a little niche and creating space for dialogue and discussion without being overly judgmental can be extremely important for peace building.
If I might just add one other thing, which is really to I don't know, Rita, about the work of your foundation other than I heard that it's focused in on women. I think that is empowering women in society is a very important and general purpose peace building activity. Now, it's not something that we do directly in that way, but indirectly we do in a significant way. For example, our agricultural development work focused in sub-Saharan Africa, where roughly 70% of the agricultural labor force is women, has a specific gender theme to it, because we believe that empowering women farmers will be a very important part of that transformation in those countries. It is generally the woman in the household who's more likely to keep the money, to invest it in their children's education. And so I think what you're doing in your way, focused in on women, is a very important part of the path forward.
Okay, I think we have two questions at the back. Charles Caden, I think, may have put up his hand first, then somebody in the back row, and then the third one is Deirdre Martell in the fourth row, followed by Stephen Pidham, also in the fourth row.
Thank you. I'm Charles Keenan from the Pears Foundation based in London. Just two brief questions for Jeff. First of all, I was intrigued by your comments about embracing your critics, sometimes your opponents, and turning them into potentially partners towards shared goals. And I just wondered whether you could give a couple of examples of where you've successfully done that and maybe where it's been more challenging. And the second question, just around political conflict and what Avila said about how maybe log frame type philanthropy wouldn't work necessarily in resolving some of the troubles. And just wondered what the strategy of the Gates Foundation is in relation to sometimes direct efforts around peace building and political conflict, whether either you have some experience of that or whether that's a possible direction for your foundation.
Right.
Thanks.
Okay, so quickly, to be clear about what I said, is engaging critics doesn't always mean turning them into partners. I don't actually think that has to be the goal. The goal does need to be to use that dialogue to be smarter about the work that you do. And so as an example right now, I'm spending a great deal of time engaging with critics of our U.S. education work. And in some cases, I think we'll just agree to disagree. Or maybe with some of them, they'll just not even agree to disagree. But on the other hand, there are some of the points that they've made that I think will help us in terms of evolving our work to be better and, in some cases, better articulated. I think right now, I don't know a lot about what it's like here, but sadly in the United States, there's a great deal of polarization. Politically and also within the education sphere. And I find that particularly sad because this is a time where we really need to step up and figure out how to bring people together for what should be a common goal. I think maybe this audience would be surprised to know that only 70% of kids in the United States graduate from high school. 30% do not. Of the 70% who do graduate, our best estimate is only about half of them are prepared to succeed in college or in with a post-secondary credential that will have value more significant value in the marketplace. And this is in the 21st century. You know, this is where we like to talk about the knowledge economy. So the thing that I think is important, and the reason I put so much energy into engaging with our education critics, is that I despise the polarization. I think it is a time for us to figure out how to come together. Even though we'll have different points of view, I think we have to be respectful about what each of our points of view represent and how we can use that to inform what will be a better path forward for our country. Now, I don't know that that's peace building. And the Gates Foundation, one of the principles of I'll go to your second question, one of the principles about the Gates Foundation is that we think in order to have impact, you have to have focus. And there are just so many things that people want us to get involved in. And we have tried to focus. It's almost an oxymoron to say that we have 25 initiatives that we focus on. And frankly, as the CEO, I kind of feel like that's enough for right now. We focus in on global health, trying to reduce the infectious disease burden in the developing world, especially for children under 5. We focus in on a set of initiatives that we call global development, agricultural development, water sanitation and hygiene, especially sanitation, and financial services for the poor. That's focused on the 1.3 billion people in the world who live in extreme poverty. And then we focus in on U.S. education, in particular supporting teaching as a profession, and also trying to improve post-secondary completion. And right now, that is the core of our work, and we've chosen to focus.
Okay, so in the back row, then Deirdre Mortell, Stephen Pidden, and Lester Salomon.
Thank you. This is Alma Yañez from Nogales, Sonora, Mexico. We have come to live what we have called the pre-Juarez situation that many of you must be aware of. And I couldn't agree more with you, Jeff, that the between 10 and 14-year-old boys have been forgotten. Everyone was taking care of the young children, and everyone was trying to fix the young men. Very few, just one in our case, NGO is focusing into that. And what we are having right now is the cartels and all the bad guys focusing into very young people, because how they are being attached to work with them is you will be out of juvenile court in a year or in 17 months. They will not hire anyone that is as old as 17, because then he might get into trouble later to get out of jail. So we must focus into that age, and it's so new for us that I would really like to hear more about it.
Well, the Raikes Foundation, I mixed them up a lot. The Raikes Foundation work that Tricia is leading, and I'm trying to be her #1 assistant, is really focused in on understanding what you can do, probably in classrooms, but maybe also in post-secondary, outside of the classroom, in the classroom or outside of the classroom, to develop the kind of skills in kids that will help them to be successful. So let me just give you one example. I mentioned a couple of attributes or skills that we think are important. Sometimes they kind of go together: self-efficacy and growth mindset. I'd suggest to you there's a very powerful book called Mindset, written by a professor at Stanford named Dweck, D-W-E-C-K, Carol Dweck. And what she discovered is that kids can kind of end up falling into one of two camps: a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. A fixed mindset is that my abilities are predetermined, and I don't have a lot of control over what my capabilities are. And at the adolescent ages, that's a particularly important time to have an intervention and to turn that around by getting kids to understand that, in fact, they are still growing, they're developing. And one of her interventions, Carol Dweck's interventions, is to teach kids about brain development, so they understand that their brain is still being wired and that they are in control of how their mental capabilities are going to develop. And that then can move these kids from fixed mindset to growth mindset, where they come to understand that they have that kind of power over themselves. That's one of 7 or 8 skills that we're trying to develop, sometimes called metacognitive and non-cognitive skills. And so that's really what the Raikes Foundation is focused in on, is understanding which of those skills have the greatest leverage towards academic performance and performance in life, and then what is it that you can do within a classroom or outside a classroom that will develop those attributes in kids. Because we believe that not only do you want them to perform well on their academics, but you want them to perform well in terms of these so-called softer skills. And that's what we're trying to figure out how to do.
Okay, thank you. Deirdre?
Hi, I'm Deirdre Mortel from One Foundation in Dublin. My question is about Jeff's very provocative comment about enlisting your opponents and your critics onto your team, and somebody in the back has asked that and got a very interesting answer. But I wanted to ask Avila the same question, because I imagine there's plenty of learning from the Community Foundation of Northern Ireland for philanthropy around how we can do that. Thank you.
Avila, nobody is an opponent of the Community Foundation of Northern Ireland.
Well, there are a couple of things. First of all, from the very beginning, and before my time with the Community Foundation, a very enlightened first chair and director made sure that our board was consisted of equal numbers of Catholics and Protestants, so that if anybody from within the communities of Northern Ireland looked at our board, they could see a reflection from their own community. And that, I think, has, and we still try to hold to that, and that, I think, built a sense of confidence. It didn't stop the criticism, but it certainly built a sense of confidence. The other thing that we did, which is perhaps somewhat different from community foundations, for example, in the States, is we had at least half our board, and still are, our community activists from those communities. So not only did people see people from their own communities, but they saw people from poor communities. So it wasn't people, talking down to them, if you like, and that really helped us. We also would have consistently, and still have to consistently, monitor where our grants go. I mean, we know, and it's true of, I think, any divided society, we know that, and we have always listed all our grants each year in our annual report, that somebody's political advisor will be sitting there with a calculator, calculating up how much has gone to Catholics, how much has gone to Protestants, how much has gone to ex-prisoners, how much has gone to victims, and that is difficult. But it's something that we got used to, and we got used to the monthly questions being put down in the House of Commons about who we were funding and why we were funding them and what was the criteria and everything else. That's transparency. Having said which, you still had your opponents and your critics. And in fairness, I think Jeff's right. I mean, you do need to take on board what they're saying, because certainly in a divided society, but actually I think in all societies, perception is as important as anybody's estimate of what facts are, and it's perception that you were dealing with, and particularly over the funding we would have given on the more edgy questions around the reintegration of political ex-prisoners and the balance with that and victims of violence, which we're also involved in. So that was difficult. But I'll end by this famous Norfolk saying from England, which basically says, "Shake hands with your enemies, but remember their names."
Okay, thank you, Avila. Stephen, and then Lester Salvin. And if we have time, one more over here.
Thank you. Is this on? Yes, Stephen Pitton from the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust. Thank you both for really interesting presentations tonight. And I think you both indicated that research was important and taking risks is important. So my question to Jeff is, we've had a meeting with the Alliance magazine this afternoon when we've heard research findings which show that of the European foundations that took part in this survey, the bigger foundations were more risk averse than the small foundations. So my question to you, Jeff, is this. Would you find from your experience of running your own foundation, which is of a smaller level, that would be true, that you're more risky with your family foundation than you might be with the Gates Foundation? And my question to Avila is this. We know that you're interested in taking risks for peace. It's the name of one of your publications. But would this suggest to you, Avila, that it's very wise for you to keep very small? Or are you open for business for others to come and support you and increase your endowment?
I didn't plan that.
A very subtly worded second question, if I may say. So, Jeff, do you want to take the first one? Allow Avila all the time she needs to concoct an answer to the second one.
Actually, you know, this may seem an odd way of answering the question, but every day I'm thankful that Bill and Melinda are living, active donors. See, I'd want to do a second cut on the data, and I'd want to see to what extent those large foundations had living, active donors versus to what extent they were perpetual foundations, where you end up with a board of trustees who is somewhat naturally attuned to be risk averse in order to protect the image and the reputation of the foundation. So I think perhaps the key, and this is one of my big fears about impactful philanthropy, is that I think that it gets tougher for a set of people who are beyond the original, who beyond the original donor, to be able to represent their interests, and it somewhat drives a risk-averse nature, and that's a concern. Trish and I have effectively, well, I guess I should say leaning, would that be okay? We're leaning towards sunsetting our foundation, you know, either 25 years or first generation after us, because we think that beyond that it'll be tough for people to want to take the risk on behalf of what our original intent was. So perhaps a provocative point of view, but it's my point of view.
Very interesting. And Avila?
Yes, well, we have a publication called Taking Risks for Peace. We actually produced that in 1999, whenever the peace process was getting steamed up. And then a politician sort of sidled up to me and says, Avila, calculated risks, calculated. So we had a second edition which was called Taking Calculated Risks for Peace. However, not to steal Lisa Jordan's thunder, who's doing a session on risk-taking, she did circulate a very apt little saying about that philanthropists should take risks because, remember, the Ark was built by amateurs, but the Titanic by professionals. In terms about being open for business, we only have 11 million as our endowment because we actually had to keep grounded in the local community. So yes, we're open for business, but there is something about perhaps for a community foundation not growing too big, because I think that it can then almost lose its footprints on the ground.
Yeah. So Stephen Pittum hasn't quite stepped down from his job yet, so the check will be in the post next week. Lester Salomon.
Thank you. Lester Solomon from Johns Hopkins University. I thought the previous speaker was going to actually execute a match between the Gates Foundation and the Northern, but I think you escaped that. I wanted to address your point about teamwork. One of the most obvious members of the team of philanthropy is, of course, the nonprofit sector, the civil society organizations. But it tends to be a partner that's sometimes overlooked as a sector to invest in. So I wanted to get your thoughts on what you think the responsibilities are of foundations to think about the third sector, the nonprofit sector, to think about its capacity, to think about its legal position, to think about the data that's available to portray it and make it visible to the rest of the world. I think we had a period in time, at least in the United States, where there was active foundation support and thinking about the third sector. I think those days are somewhat over. And I'm wondering what your concept is at the Gates Foundation of the responsibility of philanthropy to be particularly concerned about the third sector.
Well, I think I think we probably think most about it in the developing world because they tend to be an important part of the change and the change agents for what will be most receptive to our work. I wouldn't say that I think our understanding and focus on the third sector is one of our strong muscles. I'd say that that's something that we are growing in. Part of the reason for that is because We do believe in focus, and a lot of our focus has been on the underlying technological R&D, whether it's building, inventing a new vaccine, supporting the invention of a new vaccine like for meningitis A, or trying to improve crop breeding, so on and so forth. But we are shifting now to where we're getting some additional balance in terms of what you think of as delivery or integrated delivery. And I think as part of that, I think we're going to need to get stronger in terms of what I call change management. And I think part of that will be how we work with those civil society organizations. But a lot of our work is more upstream than downstream, and that then somewhat characterizes where we focus.
Avila, do you want to say anything about the infrastructure of the non-profit sector here in Northern Ireland?
Yes, we have a very extensive non-profit sector here in Northern Ireland, community as well as voluntary, partially because they actually fill the gap, which was our political deficit for many years. So whenever we were ruled direct rule from Westminster, it was community and voluntary groups that actually, I suppose, very often interfaced on policy issues. But in the issue of capacity building and collecting data on the third sector, I come at this, I can understand the benefits, but I come at this with a degree of caveat. Because sometimes I think, and I have seen funders talking about developing the capacity of the third sector, and very often it's to meet their requirements. And particularly, and I've managed a lot of European Commission money in my day for my cost, particularly in terms of meeting the requirements of those sort of multinational funders. So that you end up actually pigeonholing sort of very dynamic community and voluntary and third sector organisations into spending a huge amount of time on audit and accountancy and not actually looking at the calibre of their work. So I think that in terms of building the capacity of the third sector, we need to actually engage in discussion with the third sector about what is the capacity that is needed, and not us just flowing down what our requirements are. One of the areas I think we can, and I think you referred to it in your initial contribution, we can be extremely effective is actually encouraging and creating the frameworks for collaboration. Because all too often philanthropy actually creates winners and losers in the third sector. We get in the applications, we make a judgment, you're a winner, you're a loser, and then we expect them to work together. Well, the idea about actually, whether it's a website or whatever, about encouraging people to share ideas and to actually build more collaborative proposals, I think that shows a way forward in terms of us supporting the capacity of the third sector.
Okay, so one question and its answer stands between you and the wine which awaits you. So let's have it.
You'll be glad to know it's already been answered, so we can go to the wine.